The Boeing 777 was doomed. Both engines dead. No power. Falling from the sky. The captain had 16 minutes to find a miracle. Then an 11-year-old girl walked into his cockpit and said 5 words that changed everything. "Captain, Jesus sent me here." What happened next defied every law of aviation and proved miracles are real. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Lily Grace Morrison was 11 years old. She had blonde hair in 2 braids and wore a simple white dress. Around her neck hung a small silver cross that her grandmother gave her before she died 3 years ago. Right now, Lily was sitting in seat 14C on Delta Flight 528, traveling alone from Chicago O'Hare International Airport to Los Angeles International Airport. The flight was supposed to take 4 hours. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the Boeing 777 was carrying 283 passengers and crew members. Lily had a tag around her neck that said, "Unaccompanied minor." The flight attendants checked on her twice already. They gave her apple juice and cookies. They smiled and told her what a good girl she was. The man in seat 14B was a businessman. He wore an expensive suit and worked on his laptop. He never looked at Lily. The girl in seat 14D was a college student. She had earbuds in her ears and looked at her phone. Sometimes she wiped tears from her eyes. She never looked at Lily either. Nobody really noticed Lily. She was just another kid on the plane. But that was okay with Lily. She was happy sitting quietly with her children's Bible open on the small tray table. The Bible had pictures of Jesus walking on water, calming storms, and healing sick people. Lily loved these stories. She had read them many times. To Lily, these were not just stories. They were real. Everything in this Bible had really happened. And the Jesus from these stories was still alive. She talked to him every day like he was her best friend. Nobody knew that Lily prayed every single day for 3 years. She asked Jesus to use her for something important. "I know I'm just a kid," she would whisper at night. "But if you need me for anything, I'm ready. I trust you completely." Nobody knew that Lily had dreams where Jesus spoke to her. In these dreams, he would tell her, "When the moment comes, you will know what to do. Trust me, Lily. Just trust me." Lily believed these dreams were real messages from Jesus. She believed it with her whole heart. Now she was just a quiet girl on a plane, reading her Bible while the aircraft flew smoothly at 38,000 feet above the ground. Flight 528 took off from Chicago at 2:15 p.m. The takeoff was smooth. The weather was perfect, clear blue skies and light winds. The pilots had no concerns. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Brennan sat in the left seat. He was 56 years old and had been flying commercial aircraft for 31 years. He had over 20,000 flight hours. He knew the Boeing 777 like the back of his hand. Today felt like any other flight, routine and safe. Next to him, First Officer Sarah Chin sat in the right seat. She was 34 years old with 8 years of commercial flying experience. She was handling the radio communications while the captain flew the aircraft. "Delta 528, you're cleared to flight level 380. Have a good flight," the air traffic controller said through their headsets. "Flight level 380, Delta 528. "Thank you," Sarah replied. The aircraft climbed smoothly to 38,000 feet. The autopilot was engaged. Everything was working perfectly. Both engines, massive Rolls-Royce Trent 800 turbofan engines, were running smoothly, each producing 98,000 pounds of thrust. In the cabin, passengers settled in for the flight. Some read books. Some watched movies on the seatback screens. Some slept. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, serving drinks and snacks. Lily looked out her window at the clouds below. They looked like soft white pillows spread across the sky. She closed her Bible and whispered a quiet prayer, "Thank you, Jesus, for keeping us safe. I love you." The businessman in 14B typed aggressively on his laptop. He was working on a business deal worth millions of dollars. He was stressed and angry because things were not going well. The college student in 14D was crying quietly. She had just broken up with her boyfriend. She felt like her life was falling apart. She didn't believe in God. She thought religion was for weak people who couldn't handle reality. Neither of them paid any attention to the small girl sitting between them. The flight continued smoothly for the first hour. The pilots were relaxed. The passengers were comfortable. Everything was normal. Then, at 3:47 p.m., everything changed in an instant. The Boeing 777 was cruising over the desert terrain between Colorado and Utah when it happened. A massive flock of Canada geese, over 100 birds, appeared directly in the aircraft's flight path. There was no time to avoid them. No time to react. The birds struck both engines simultaneously. The impact was devastating. Engine number 1, mounted on the left wing, ingested dozens of birds into its turbine blades. The blades, spinning at over 10,000 revolutions per minute, shattered instantly. Metal fragments tore through the engine's interior. Within 3 seconds, the engine suffered catastrophic failure. Fire erupted inside the cowling, then was immediately snuffed out as the engine died completely. Engine number 2 suffered the same fate. Birds slammed into the intake, destroying the delicate turbine blades. The engine coughed, sputtered, and went silent. Both engines failed within 5 seconds of each other. Inside the cockpit, every alarm system screamed at once. Warning lights flashed red across the instrument panel. The master caution alarm blared. Engine fire engine 1. Engine fire engine 2. Dual engine failure. Hydraulic pressure low. Captain Brennan's hands flew across the controls. His 31 years of experience took over instantly. "I have the aircraft," he said, his voice steady despite the terror racing through his mind. He disconnected the autopilot and took manual control. Sarah Chen's fingers moved rapidly across the engine control panel. "Attempting restart on engine 1, she said, following the emergency procedures she had memorized years ago. She moved the start switch. Nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. "Engine 1 will not restart," she reported, trying to keep her voice calm. "Attempting engine 2 restart." She repeated the procedure. The engine didn't respond. "Engine 2 will not restart. We have 0 thrust." Captain Brennan felt his stomach drop. In 31 years of flying, he had trained for single-engine failures dozens of times. Every pilot did. But dual-engine failure at cruising altitude? That was the nightmare scenario that almost never happened. But it was happening now. The Boeing 777, weighing 560,000 pounds, was no longer a powered aircraft. It was a glider. And gliders don't glide very well at 38,000 feet with no engines. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Captain Brennan transmitted on the emergency frequency. "Denver Center, this is Delta 528. We have dual-engine flameout at flight level 380. Both engines are dead. We are gliding. We have 283 souls on board." The air traffic controller's voice came back immediately, and even through the radio, the shock was clear. "Delta 528, say again. Did you say dual-engine failure?" "Affirmative. Both engines are completely dead. No thrust. We're losing altitude at 2,000 feet per minute. We need the nearest suitable airport immediately." There was a pause. The controller was frantically checking his radar screen, calculating distances and altitudes. "Delta 528, nearest suitable airport is Phoenix Sky Harbor, bearing 152 degrees, distance 140 nautical miles. But, you're too high and too far. Calculate you'll lose altitude before reaching any runway. Captain Brennan looked at his instruments. The math was brutally simple. They were descending at 2,000 feet per minute. They had 38,000 feet of altitude. That gave them 19 minutes before they hit the ground. Phoenix was 140 miles away. At their current glide speed of 250 knots, that was over 30 minutes of flight time. They wouldn't make it. Not even close. Sarah looked at him, her face pale. Mike, we're not going to reach Phoenix. I know, he said quietly. She checked the navigation display. There's nothing else. No airports, no military bases. Just mountains and desert. Captain Brennan's hands gripped the control yoke. He had to tell the passengers. He had to tell 283 people that they were probably going to die. He pressed the public address button. His voice, steady but filled with emotion, filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Brennan. We have experienced a dual-engine failure. Both engines are not functioning. We are currently gliding and working on engine restart procedures. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for emergency landing. Passengers, please follow all instructions from the crew. He released the button and put his head in his hands for just a moment. Then he lifted it again. He was the captain. He had to try everything, even if it was hopeless. The moment the passengers heard the captain's words, the cabin erupted. Screaming. Crying. Panic. A woman in row 8 started hyperventilating. Her husband held her, his own face white with terror. A man in row 22 pulled out his phone and called his wife. Honey, I love you. Tell the kids I love them. The engine stopped. I don't think we're going to make it. A mother in row 16 held her 2 small children, tears streaming down her face. It's okay, babies. It's okay. Close your eyes. Mommy's here. The flight attendants tried to maintain order, but their own faces showed the same terror. They knew what dual-engine failure meant. They had trained for it in simulations, but everyone knew the truth. In real life, this situation almost never ended well. In seat 14B, the businessman stopped typing. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't control them. All his money, all his business deals, all his importance, none of it mattered now. In seat 14D, the college student ripped out her earbuds. She was sobbing, calling her ex-boyfriend. Please answer. Please. I don't want to die angry at you. Please answer. But he didn't pick up. And in seat 14C, between these two terrified people, Lily Grace Morrison sat very still. She heard the captain's words. She felt the airplane gliding, unnaturally quiet without the sound of the engines. She saw the businessmen shaking. She heard the college student crying. But Lily didn't feel afraid. Instead, she felt something else. A warmth spreading through her chest, starting where her grandmother's cross touched her skin. A feeling of peace that didn't make sense but felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. And then she heard a voice. Not through her ears, but inside her heart. A voice she recognized from her dreams, from her prayers, from 3 years of talking to someone she couldn't see but knew was always there. It's time, Lily. She looked up from her Bible. Standing in the aisle, right next to her seat, was a figure dressed in white. He was tall, with a gentle face and eyes full of love and authority. His presence filled the entire space around him with light that somehow nobody else could see. Lily knew instantly who it was. She had seen this face in the pictures in her Bible. She had seen this face in her dreams. Jesus. He was really there. Not a dream. Not her imagination. Really, truly there. Jesus smiled at her, and when he spoke, his voice filled her entire being with perfect peace. Lily, I need you to go to the cockpit. Tell the pilots exactly what I tell you. They won't believe you at first, but they will listen. Every word I speak through you will save lives. All 283 people on this airplane will live if you trust me completely. Do you trust me, Lily? Tears filled Lily's eyes, but she wasn't crying from fear. She was crying because Jesus was really here, and he was asking her to help save everyone. Yes, Jesus, she whispered. I trust you. I trust you completely. Jesus's smile grew warmer. Then follow me. He turned and walked toward the front of the aircraft, moving through the chaos of screaming passengers like a presence of perfect calm. Lily unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. The businessman in 14B grabbed her arm. Sit down. Are you crazy? We're crashing. But Lily gently pulled her arm free. It's okay, she said softly. Jesus is going to save us. I have to help him. She followed Jesus up the aisle. A flight attendant, a woman in her 30s with tears streaming down her face, tried to stop her. Sweetie, no. Sit down. Please, it's not safe to be walking around. I need to talk to the pilots, Lily said, her voice quiet but certain. Jesus told me how to save the plane. The flight attendant stared at this small girl with braids and a white dress. Any other time, she would have thought the child was confused, scared, hallucinating from fear. But something in Lily's eyes stopped her. There was a clarity there, a peace, a certainty that didn't belong to an 11-year-old child facing death. Please, Lily said gently. People are going to die if I don't help. Jesus showed me what to do. You have to let me through. The flight attendant looked at this child. She looked at the chaos in the cabin, people screaming, crying, praying, saying goodbye to loved ones. She looked at the cockpit door. She made an impossible choice. She opened the cockpit door. Captain Brennan was trying everything. He and Sarah had attempted engine restart 7 times. Nothing worked. The engines were completely dead. He was looking at his navigation display, desperately searching for anywhere flat enough to attempt an emergency landing. But there was nothing. Just mountains and desert terrain that would tear the aircraft apart on impact. Then he heard the cockpit door open behind him. He turned his head, expecting to see a flight attendant. Instead, he saw a small girl with blonde braids, wearing a white dress, with a cross necklace around her neck. His face twisted in anguish and confusion. What? No. Get her out of here. Captain, Jesus sent me, Lily said. Her voice was steady. Calm. She looked directly at him with eyes that held no fear. He's standing right there, she continued, pointing to the empty space next to the captain's seat, where only she could see Jesus standing. And he's going to tell me how to save everyone. You need to listen to me. Sarah Chen turned in her seat, her eyes wide. She's hallucinating from fear. We need to get her back to her seat. I'm not scared, Lily interrupted gently. Jesus said you have 16 minutes before you can't reach any airport. He said if you do exactly what I tell you, everyone lives. But you have to trust him. Do you trust Jesus, Captain? Captain Brennan stared at this child. This 11-year-old girl standing in his cockpit, claiming Jesus sent her, pointing at empty air and saying God was going to save them. He had been flying for 31 years. He had handled emergencies, engine failures, hydraulic problems, electrical fires. He was trained. He was experienced. He was rational. But right now, with both engines dead and the ground coming up fast, all his training and experience and rationality were useless. He looked at his altimeter. They had descended to 34,000 feet. He did the math. 16 minutes. The girl had said 16 minutes. She was right. He looked at Sarah. She looked back at him with desperate eyes. Then he looked at Lily again. At this small, calm child with absolute faith in her eyes. He made an impossible choice. "What does Jesus want me to do?" he whispered. Lily closed her eyes. She was listening to a voice only she could hear. Then she opened her eyes and spoke. "Jesus says turn to heading 195. Right now." Captain Brennan's hands moved. He turned the aircraft to heading 195. "There's an abandoned military airstrip 87 miles away," Lily continued. "It's not on your charts because it's been closed for 20 years. But the runway is still there. It's long enough and strong enough. You can reach it if you glide perfectly." Sarah Chen pulled up the navigation display on her screen. She zoomed in on the area at heading 195. There's nothing there. Just desert. No airports, no runways, nothing. "It's there," Lily said with complete certainty. "Jesus says it's there. He says it was called Gila Bend Auxiliary Army Airfield. It closed in 2003. Nobody uses it anymore. But it's still there." Sarah frantically typed into the computer, searching for information about abandoned airfields in that area. Her breath caught. "Oh my God. There is an old military airfield. Gila Bend. It closed in 2003. But there's no information about runway condition. It could be completely destroyed." "It's not destroyed," Lily said calmly. "Jesus says the runway is cracked and has weeds growing through it, but it's solid enough. You can land there." Captain Brennan stared at his heading indicator. Heading 195. Flying towards something that might or might not be there, based on the word of an 11-year-old girl who claimed to be talking to Jesus. But what choice did he have? "Distance to this runway?" he asked. 87 miles, Lily said. "But you need to adjust your descent rate. You're descending too fast. Jesus says you need to descend at exactly 1,800 feet per minute. Not faster, not slower. Exactly 1,800. Sarah looked at her instruments. "We're descending at 2,000 feet per minute. Change it to 1,800, Lily said. "If you descend too fast, you'll fall short of the runway. If you descend too slow, you'll overshoot it. It has to be exactly 1,800 feet per minute." Captain Brennan adjusted the aircraft's pitch, changing their glide angle to reduce the descent rate to exactly 1,800 feet per minute. The aircraft responded smoothly. "Okay," he said, his voice shaking. "We're at 1,800 feet per minute, heading 195. What else?" Lily closed her eyes again, listening. Jesus stood beside the captain, speaking words only Lily could hear. She repeated them exactly. "In 3 minutes, you need to deploy the flaps to 15 degrees. Not now. In exactly 3 minutes. You need the extra drag to slow down, but if you do it too early, you won't reach the runway." For the next 14 minutes, Lily stood in the cockpit, her eyes closing and opening as she listened to Jesus and repeated his instructions to the pilots. "Deploy flaps to 15 degrees now. Lower the landing gear in 90 seconds. Adjust your glide path 2 degrees down. You're 200 feet too high. In 40 seconds, you'll see the runway. It's going to look rough, but don't be afraid." Every instruction was precise. Technical. Impossible for an 11-year-old child to know. But every instruction worked perfectly. Sarah Chen was typing notes, recording everything, her hands shaking. "How do you know these things? How do you know descent rates and flap settings and glide paths?" Lily opened her eyes and smiled gently. "I don't know them. Jesus knows them. I'm just saying what he tells me." At 8,000 feet, Sarah gasped and pointed at her screen. "I see it. There's a runway. Oh my God, there's actually a runway at heading 195. Captain Brennan looked through the windscreen. There, in the middle of the desert, was a long strip of concrete. Old. Cracked. Covered with weeds and sand. but undeniably a runway. Jesus says to tell all the passengers to pray, Lily said suddenly. Right now. Everyone needs to pray. Captain Brennan reached for the public address button. His hand was shaking so badly he almost missed it. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice breaking with emotion, we've found a runway. We're going to attempt a landing. I need everyone to pray. Whatever you believe, whoever you pray to, pray right now. Pray hard. In the cabin, passengers who had been crying out in terror fell silent. Then, voices rose in prayer. Christian prayers. Our Father, who art in heaven. Muslim prayers. Bismillah ir-Rahman ir-Rahim. Jewish prayers. Shema Yisrael. And atheists, people who had never believed in God, whispered desperate pleas, please, if you're real, please help us. Please. In seat 14C, the college student with purple hair closed her eyes and whispered, God, if you exist, please save us. I'm sorry I didn't believe. Please. The businessman in 14B held his cross necklace, one he'd worn for years but never really thought about, and prayed for the first time in decades. At 500 feet, Lily opened her eyes and looked directly at Captain Brennan. Jesus says you're the best pilot he could have chosen for this. You're going to land this plane perfectly because he's guiding your hands right now. Don't be afraid, Captain. You're not alone. Tears streamed down Captain Brennan's face as he lined up with the cracked runway. At 200 feet, he could see every detail. The concrete was damaged. Weeds grew through large cracks. It looked terrible. But it was there. It was real. Landing checklist complete, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. I have the runway, Captain Brennan said. God help us. He is, Lily said softly. The Boeing 777 descended toward the abandoned runway at 140 knots with no engine power. Captain Brennan's hands gripped the controls. 31 years of experience focused into this single moment. At 50 feet, he pulled back slightly on the yoke, flaring the aircraft for landing. At 20 feet, the main landing gear touched the cracked concrete. The impact was hard. Much harder than a normal landing. The aircraft bounced once, then slammed back down. Passengers screamed. The nose gear hit next, sending another violent jolt through the aircraft. Captain Brennan immediately deployed the speed brakes and pressed hard on the brake pedals, even though without engine power, the brakes had limited pressure. The aircraft skidded along the old runway. Pieces of concrete kicked up. Dust and debris flew. The plane shook violently. They were going too fast. The end of the runway was coming up fast. Come on, Captain Brennan muttered, pressing the brakes as hard as he could. The aircraft slowed. 100 knots. 80 knots. 60 knots. The end of the runway was 300 feet away. Then 200 feet. Then 100 feet. At 40 knots, the aircraft finally stopped. They were 200 feet from the end of the runway. Beyond that was open desert that would have torn the aircraft apart. But they had stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, someone in the back of the cabin started screaming. Not from terror this time, but from joy, from relief, from disbelief. Others joined in. Crying, shouting, laughing hysterically. We're alive. Oh God, we're alive. The flight attendants, tears streaming down their faces, opened the emergency exits. Evacuation slides deployed automatically. Passengers rushed to the exits, stumbling down the slides onto the hot desert sand. Many collapsed to their knees the moment their feet touched the ground. Some were praying. Some were crying. Some just sat in the sand, staring at the aircraft in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. All 283 passengers and crew members survived. Not a single serious injury beyond bruises and minor cuts from the rough landing. In the cockpit, Captain Brennan sat frozen in his seat, hands still gripping the yoke, staring straight ahead. Sarah Chen was crying, her shoulders shaking. "We're alive. How are we alive?" Captain Brennan slowly turned to look at the small girl standing behind his seat. Lily smiled at him, that same peaceful smile she'd had the entire time. "How did you know?" he whispered. "How did you know about this runway? It's been closed for over 20 years. It's not on any active navigation charts. How could you possibly know it was here?" "Jesus showed it to me," Lily said simply. "He knows where everything is. He made everything. But the descent rates, the flap settings, the glide path calculations." Sarah's voice was hoarse. "That's advanced aviation knowledge. Pilots train for years to learn that. You couldn't possibly." "I didn't know any of it," Lily said gently. "Jesus told me, and I just repeated his words. I was just listening." Captain Brennan looked at this child. This 11-year-old girl with braids and a white dress and absolute faith. Tears streamed down his face. "I've been flying for 31 years, he said, his voice breaking. "I've handled every kind of emergency. I've landed in storms, with failed systems, with sick crew members. But this, what you just did, what Jesus did through you, I have no explanation for it. None. According to everything I know about aviation, we should all be dead right now." He reached out and took Lily's small hand in his. "You saved 283 lives today, little one. You and Jesus saved all of us." Lily shook her head. "I didn't save anyone, Captain. Jesus did everything. I just trusted him and said what he told me. That's all." Outside, emergency vehicles were starting to arrive. Someone from the nearby town of Gila Bend had seen the aircraft and called 911. Soon, news helicopters would arrive. Rescue teams. Investigators. Reporters. But for now, 283 people sat in the desert sand next to an abandoned runway, alive against all odds, witnesses to something they couldn't explain. Within hours, the story exploded across the world. Miracle landing, 11-year-old girl guided by divine vision saves 283 lives. Boeing 777 makes emergency landing on abandoned runway following dual engine failure, all survive. Child says Jesus gave her instructions to save plane. The Federal Aviation Administration sent a team of investigators immediately. The National Transportation Safety Board launched a full investigation. Aviation experts, engineers, and pilots descended on the remote Arizona desert. They examined the aircraft. Both engines were completely destroyed, total loss of both turbofans due to catastrophic bird strikes. The investigation confirmed that engine restart was impossible. They pulled the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder. They listened to every word spoken in the cockpit during the emergency. They heard Lily's voice giving precise technical instructions. Deploy flaps to 15 degrees now. Descent rate exactly 1,800 feet per minute. Adjust glide path 2 degrees down. They heard Captain Brennan following these instructions from an 11-year-old child. Senior aviation investigator Robert Martinez held a press conference 5 days later. "According to our analysis," he said, standing before dozens of reporters and cameras, "the flight path was mathematically perfect. Every adjustment, every descent rate, every command, it's as if someone with perfect knowledge of aviation physics and perfect knowledge of the terrain guided them. The glide ratio, the energy management, the approach angle, all flawless." A reporter asked, "But that guidance came from an 11-year-old girl with no aviation training?" Martinez paused. He was a man of science, data, and facts. But the facts in this case defied explanation. "The cockpit voice recorder is clear," he said carefully. "The child, Lily Morrison, provided technical instructions that a trained pilot would know. The probability of a child with no training accidentally guessing the correct procedures is, statistically impossible. Another reporter, are you saying this was a miracle? Martinez took a deep breath. I'm saying that according to every analysis we've conducted, Flight 528 should not have been able to reach that runway. The glide distance, the altitude loss, the timing, it doesn't add up mathematically. Yet they made it. All 283 people survived. I cannot explain how. I can only tell you what happened. The cockpit voice recording was released to the public. Millions of people listened to it. They heard a little girl's calm voice giving impossible instructions. They heard the desperation in the pilots' voices. They heard Lily say, Jesus says you're the best pilot he could have chosen. You're going to land this plane perfectly because he's guiding your hands. And they heard Captain Brennan land the aircraft safely. Churches around the world played the recording. Pastors preached sermons about faith like a child. Atheist forums debated whether it was real or somehow fabricated. News channels showed it repeatedly. But nobody could deny that 283 people who should have died were alive. 1 week after the emergency landing, Lily sat at a press conference table between her parents. Her father, a quiet man who worked in construction, looked uncomfortable with all the cameras. Her mother, a teacher, held Lily's hand tightly. Lily looked small in the big chair. She wore a simple blue dress and her grandmother's cross necklace. Her blonde braids hung over her shoulders. Hundreds of reporters filled the room. Cameras flashed constantly. A reporter asked, Lily, can you tell us what happened on the plane? Lily spoke into the microphone, her voice quiet but clear. The plane's engine stopped working. People were scared. I looked up, and I saw Jesus standing in the aisle. He told me to go to the cockpit and tell the pilots what he said. So I did. What did Jesus look like? He was wearing white. He had kind eyes. He smiled at me. He looked like the pictures in my Bible. Another reporter, Lily, you gave the pilots technical instructions about descent rates and flap settings. How did you know those things? I didn't know them, Lily said simply. Jesus told me what to say. I just listened to him and repeated his words to the captain. Do you expect people to believe you really saw Jesus? Lily looked directly at the camera. Despite all the attention, her face was peaceful. I don't need everyone to believe me, she said. The 283 people who are alive, they know something happened that nobody can explain. The pilots know. The people who listen to the recording know. Jesus saved us. I was just the one he chose to speak through. He could have chosen anyone. He chose me because I believed he could do it. A reporter near the back shouted, but many people pray and don't get miracles. Why did God save your plane but not others? Lily thought for a moment. I don't know why Jesus does everything he does. I just know that he's real, and he loves people, and he saved us that day. Maybe he wanted to show people that he's still here, still doing miracles. Maybe he wanted people to believe again. Her mother squeezed her hand, tears in her eyes. Captain Michael Brennan, sitting at a separate table, spoke next. I want to say something, he said, his voice firm. I've been a pilot for 31 years. I've flown for the Air Force and commercial airlines. I've always trusted in training, procedures, and my own skill. I never considered myself religious. I didn't go to church. I didn't pray. He paused, emotion filling his voice. But I heard this child, this 11-year-old girl, give me instructions that saved 283 lives. Instructions she couldn't possibly know. She told me about a runway that wasn't on my charts. She gave me descent rates and speeds with perfect accuracy. And she did it with absolute certainty because she was listening to someone I couldn't see. He wiped his eyes. I don't have another explanation. Science doesn't have an explanation. Aviation experts don't have an explanation. God used this little girl to save us. And I will spend the rest of my life grateful that she trusted him enough to listen. The room was silent. Then Sarah Chen, the first officer, spoke. I'm a Christian. I've been a Christian my whole life. But I'll be honest, I never really expected God to show up in a real, tangible way. Faith was something private, personal. Then I watched God save our aircraft through a child's voice. I heard her give instructions that are taught in advanced flight training. I can't deny what happened. Jesus was real in that cockpit. In the weeks after the landing, several passengers shared their experiences. The businessman from seat 14B, James Peterson, a 52-year-old CEO, held his own press conference. I've spent my entire adult life chasing money, power, and success, he said. I thought those things mattered. The morning of that flight, I was angry because a business deal was falling apart. I thought it was the most important thing in the world. He shook his head. Then the engines failed, and I thought I was going to die. I wasn't thinking about my business. I was thinking about my family, about God, about all the time I wasted on things that don't matter. He held up a Bible. This little girl who sat next to me, I never even noticed her. She was nobody to me. But she saved my life because she listened to Jesus. I've started reading the Bible she was reading. I've started praying. I've stopped working weekends and started spending time with my kids. That plane crash changed everything for me. The college student from seat 14D, Emma Rodriguez, 19 years old, posted a video that went viral. I was an atheist, she said, sitting in her dorm room. I thought religion was for weak people who needed comfort. I thought faith was just make-believe. The day of the flight, I was heartbroken over a breakup. I felt like life was meaningless. She wiped tears from her eyes. When the engines failed, I was terrified. I called my ex-boyfriend, but he didn't answer. I thought I was going to die alone and scared. Then I heard the captain tell everyone to pray. And I did. I prayed to a God I didn't even believe in. She held up a small cross necklace. After we landed, I couldn't stop thinking about that little girl. She was so calm, so sure. She saved my life by trusting Jesus. How could I keep pretending God wasn't real? I saw a miracle. I'm not an atheist anymore. I can't be. Jesus saved us. A mother who was traveling with her 2 children said, I was holding my babies, thinking they were going to die. I was praying harder than I've ever prayed. When we landed safely, my 6-year-old daughter asked me, Mommy, did Jesus save us? And I said yes. Because he did. Not everyone believed it was a miracle. Skeptics published articles arguing that Lily had overheard adults talking about aviation, or that she was coached, or that the whole thing was exaggerated. But nobody could explain how an 11-year-old knew about an abandoned runway that wasn't on navigation charts. Nobody could explain how she gave precise technical instructions with perfect timing. Nobody could explain why all 283 people survived a crash that should have killed everyone. Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychologist who specialized in childhood development, was interviewed on television. I've analyzed the cockpit voice recording, she said. Lily's instructions demonstrate knowledge far beyond her age and education. The terminology, the timing, the precision, it's inconsistent with a child's cognitive abilities. Either she was coached in advance, which is impossible since the emergency was random, or something else happened that I cannot explain scientifically. The interviewer asked, do you believe she really saw Jesus? Dr. Foster paused. I believe something extraordinary happened. Whether it was a divine vision or some other phenomenon, I don't know. But the result is undeniable. 283 people are alive. Churches around the world invited Lily to share her testimony. Her parents carefully chose a few churches where Lily felt comfortable. At a large church in Denver, Lily stood on a stage in front of 5,000 people. She looked tiny behind the podium. Jesus has always been real to me, she said into the microphone. I talk to him every day. When people needed him most, he used me. Not because I'm special or smart. Just because I believed he could do anything. If you believe Jesus can do anything, he will use you too when the time comes. You just have to trust him. The congregation was silent. Then, slowly, people began to stand. Applauding. Crying. Worshipping. 6 months after Flight 528, life returned to something close to normal for Lily. She went back to 6th grade. She did her homework. She played with her friends. She was still the same quiet, gentle girl she'd always been. But now, people recognized her. Her face had been on television. Her story had been in newspapers around the world. Sometimes it was hard. Kids at school asked her to do miracles or asked if she could talk to God for them. Teachers treated her differently, like she was fragile or special. But Lily's parents helped her stay grounded. "You're the same Lily you've always been," her mother told her. "Jesus used you for something important, but you're still our daughter. You're still a kid. Don't let this change who you are inside." Lily understood. She didn't want to be famous. She just wanted to love Jesus and help people when she could. The passengers from Flight 528 created an organization called 283 Miracles Foundation. They raised money for aviation safety research, supported faith-based charities, and helped families in need. Every year on the anniversary of the emergency landing, all 283 passengers and crew members were invited to meet at the abandoned Gila Bend runway. The runway had become sacred ground, a place where God had shown up in an undeniable way. The first anniversary gathering drew 247 of the 283 people. They stood on the cracked concrete where their aircraft had skidded to a stop. Captain Brennan spoke to the crowd, "1 year ago, we should have died. Every aviation expert said it was impossible to survive. But we're standing here today because a little girl trusted Jesus, and Jesus saved us. I'll never forget that. I'll never stop being grateful." Then he did something unexpected. He asked Lily to come forward. She walked to the front, looking small among all the adults. "I want everyone to know," Captain Brennan said, "that I've become a Christian. 3 weeks after the emergency landing, I was baptized. I'm 57 years old, and for the first time in my life, I have real faith." He knelt down to Lily's level. "You saved my life, little one. But more than that, you showed me that Jesus is real. Thank you." He hugged her, and many people in the crowd were crying. The full cockpit voice recording became one of the most listened to audio files in history. Churches played it. News programs played it. It was shared millions of times on social media. People could hear the progression of the emergency. The alarms blaring. Captain Brennan's Mayday call. The pilot's desperate attempts to restart the engines. The discussion about having no suitable airport within range. The captain's announcement to the passengers. Then, the cockpit door opening. Lily's voice, "Captain, Jesus sent me." And for the next 14 minutes, people heard a miracle unfold in real time. They heard an 11-year-old give impossible instructions. They heard skeptical pilots gradually beginning to trust her. They heard Lily say, with absolute certainty, "It's there. Jesus says it's there." They heard her final words before landing, "Jesus says you're the best pilot he could have chosen. You're going to land this plane perfectly because he's guiding your hands right now." And they heard the landing, the impact, the skidding, the screaming, then the silence, then the eruption of joy. One atheist blogger wrote, "I've listened to this recording 20 times. I want to find a rational explanation. But I can't. This child couldn't possibly know these things. The timing couldn't be coincidence. The runway shouldn't have been there, yet it was. I don't want to believe in miracles, but I cannot explain this away." A pilot with 25 years of experience wrote, "I've analyzed Flight 528's flight path and glide ratio. Mathematically, they shouldn't have reached that runway. They were too high and too far. Yet somehow, their glide path was perfect, optimized beyond what our flight planning computers could calculate. The only explanation is that something or someone with perfect knowledge guided them. I believe it was God. Lily was asked to speak at churches, conferences, and events around the world. She was careful about which invitations she accepted. She didn't want to become a celebrity. She just wanted to tell people about Jesus. At a youth conference in Texas, 10,000 teenagers listened to her story. "A lot of people ask me why Jesus chose me," Lily said. "I think it's because kids believe things are possible that adults think are impossible. Adults have education and training and experience. That's all good. But sometimes, all that knowledge makes it hard to believe in miracles." She held up her children's Bible. "I just believe Jesus could do what he said. When he told me to go to the cockpit, I didn't think that's impossible. I just went. When he told me what to say, I didn't think that doesn't make sense. I just said it. Sometimes faith is easier when you're still a kid." She paused, looking at the crowd. "But you don't have to be a kid to have faith like this. You just have to trust Jesus completely. He wants to use all of us. He's looking for people who will believe him and do what he says, even when it seems impossible." At a church in South Korea, she spoke through a translator. "Some people ask me if I still see Jesus," she said. "I haven't seen him with my eyes since that day on the plane. But I feel him with me every day. He talks to my heart when I pray. He's always there, even when I can't see him. That's what faith is, trusting he's there even when you can't see him." A pastor in Nigeria preached an entire sermon about Lily's story. "This child had nothing the world values," he said. "She had no education, no degrees, no power, no money. She was just a little girl on a plane. But she had the one thing that matters most, faith. Real faith. The kind of faith that believes God can do anything. And God used her to save 283 lives. Brothers and sisters, God doesn't need your education or your wealth or your status. He just needs your faith." Captain Michael Brennan's life changed dramatically after Flight 528. 3 weeks after the emergency landing, he was baptized at a church in Chicago. His wife, who had been a Christian for years but never pushed him, cried tears of joy as he went under the water. "For 31 years, I trusted myself," he said in his baptism testimony. "I trusted my training, my experience, my ability. Then one day, all of that became worthless. My aircraft was dead. My options were gone. I had nothing left but a little girl who trusted Jesus. And that trust saved my life." He wiped his eyes. "I can't go back to living like Jesus isn't real. I saw what he did. I heard him speak through a child. He saved us. Now I live for him." Brennan continued flying for Delta, but his approach changed. Before each flight, he prayed. He talked openly with his crews about his faith. He started a Bible study for pilots and flight attendants. Other crew members noticed the change. Some were inspired by it. Others were skeptical. But everyone who flew with him knew that Captain Brennan was different now. He still followed all procedures and protocols. He was still professional and skilled. But there was something else, a peace, a confidence that didn't come from his own ability. "I used to fear engine failures," he told a reporter. "Now I don't. Not because I'm reckless, but because I know God is with me. If he could save me when both engines died at 38,000 feet, he can handle anything." 2 years after Flight 528, Brennan retired from commercial aviation. He started a ministry for pilots, sharing his testimony at aviation conferences and churches. "I spent 31 years flying," he would say. "But the most important moment of my career was when I stopped trusting myself and started trusting God. That's when the real miracle happened." Emma Rodriguez, the college student from Seat 14D, became one of the most vocal witnesses to the miracle. She had been an atheist, certain that religion was fiction. But after Flight 528, she couldn't maintain that position. "I used to mock Christians," she said in a testimony video. "I thought they were delusional. I had all the arguments against God memorized. Then I was on a plane where the engines died, and an 11-year-old girl saved my life by listening to Jesus. How do I explain that away? I can't." She transferred to a Christian university and began studying theology. "I have so many questions," she said. "I don't understand everything about faith. But I know Jesus is real. I know He saved us. I can't pretend anymore. I saw a miracle." She started a podcast called Skeptic to Believer, where she interviewed other people who had experienced things that changed their view of God. "Faith isn't blind," she would say. "I have reasons for believing. I was there. I saw what happened. My belief is based on evidence, the evidence of 283 people who should be dead but are alive." 3 years after Flight 528, Lily was 14 years old and in 8th grade. She was taller now, her face a little more mature, but she still wore her grandmother's cross necklace every day. Life had mostly returned to normal. She had friends at school who knew her story but treated her like a regular person. She played volleyball. She did homework. She texted with friends about boys and movies and normal teenage things. But she also continued to speak at churches and events, sharing her testimony when she felt God wanted her to. At a large gathering in California, she was asked, "Do you ever wish you hadn't been on that plane? That you didn't have all this attention?" Lily thought for a moment. "Sometimes the attention is hard. But I would never wish I wasn't there. Jesus used me to save people's lives. How could I wish that didn't happen? Those 283 people are alive. They have families and friends and futures because Jesus saved them. That's more important than whether I like being recognized." She smiled. "Plus, I learned something important that day. I learned that when Jesus asks you to do something, you should just do it. Don't overthink it. Don't worry about what people will think. Just trust Him and obey. That's all I did. And He did the rest." An interviewer asked, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" "I don't know yet," Lily said. "Maybe I'll be a teacher like my mom. Maybe something else. But whatever I do, I want to help people know that Jesus is real and that He loves them. Because He does. He proved that when He saved all those people on the plane." The annual gathering at Gila Bend Runway became a tradition. Every year, more of the 283 passengers and crew members attended. The runway itself was preserved. The local community cleaned it up, painted markings, and installed a memorial plaque that read, "On this runway, 283 lives were saved through faith and divine guidance. Flight 528. A reminder that miracles still happen." At the 5th anniversary, nearly all 283 people attended. Families came. Children who had been babies during the emergency were now 5 years old, running around the desert while their parents stood on the sacred concrete. Captain Brennan, now fully retired, spoke to the crowd. "5 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought everyone on my aircraft would die. Then God sent a little girl to my cockpit, and she saved us. Not with her own knowledge, but with God's knowledge. She was just willing to listen and obey." He looked at Lily, now 16 years old, standing in the crowd. "Lily, would you come up here?" She walked forward, and the crowd applauded. "I want to say thank you," Captain Brennan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for trusting Jesus. Thank you for being brave enough to walk to that cockpit. Thank you for saving our lives." Lily hugged him, and many people in the crowd were crying. Then Lily spoke to the crowd. "I didn't save anyone. Jesus did. I just listened to Him. That's all any of us need to do, listen to Jesus and do what He says. He's still speaking. He's still doing miracles. He still wants to use ordinary people like me and you to do extraordinary things. She looked around at the 283 people standing on the desert runway. We're all here because Jesus loved us enough to save us. He didn't have to. But he did. So let's live like people who have been saved. Let's love others the way he loved us. Let's tell people that miracles are real and that Jesus is alive. The crowd erupted in applause and worship. The story of Flight 528 became part of aviation history, but more than that, it became a testimony of faith that spread around the world. Churches told the story to encourage people to trust God in impossible situations. Parents told the story to their children to teach them about faith. Pilots and flight attendants listened to the cockpit recording and were reminded that God is present even in the most desperate emergencies. The 283 Miracles Foundation grew into an international organization. They funded aviation safety improvements, supported disaster relief, and provided scholarships for students pursuing careers in aviation and ministry. Captain Brennan wrote a book called Gliding on Faith that became a bestseller. He donated all proceeds to the foundation. Sarah Chen, the first officer, became a Czech captain and trainer. She included the story of Flight 528 in her training sessions. This is what happens when we trust God in the cockpit, she would tell new pilots. We still follow procedures. We still use our training. But we also remember that God is with us, and sometimes, he shows up in ways we don't expect. Emma Rodriguez became a pastor. She preached about encountering God in unexpected ways. I didn't find God in a church or through an argument, she would say. I found him on a plane where I thought I was going to die. He saved my life through a child who believed in him. That's the kind of God we serve, the God who shows up in crisis and proves he's real. Lily is now 18 years old. She's about to graduate high school. She still wears her grandmother's cross necklace. She's been accepted to several universities. She's still deciding what to study, what to do with her life. But tonight, she kneels beside her bed like she's done every night since she was a little girl. Jesus, she whispers, thank you for using me that day. Thank you for saving all those people. Thank you for showing me that you're real and that you love us. She pauses, smiling. If you ever need me again, I'm ready. I'll always trust you. Whatever you ask me to do, I'll do it. Because you're Jesus. You can do anything. And I believe in you. She climbs into bed, pulls up her blanket, and falls asleep. And somewhere in the mystery of eternity, Jesus smiles at the girl who trusted him completely, who believed miracles were possible, who saved 283 lives simply by listening to his voice. Because that's what faith does. It doesn't need to understand everything. It doesn't need to see the whole plan. It just needs to trust that when Jesus speaks, anything is possible. And on a Tuesday afternoon at 38,000 feet, when two engines failed and death seemed certain, a little girl with braids and a cross necklace proved that faith still moves heaven, that miracles still happen, and that Jesus still saves lives through anyone willing to believe. All 283 people who walked away from that desert runway are living proof. The miracle of Flight 528 will be told for generations, not just as an aviation story, but as a testimony that God is real, that he still intervenes, and that he uses the most unlikely people to accomplish the most impossible things. Because in the end, it's not about who we are or what we can do. It's about who Jesus is and what he can do through us when we trust him completely. That's the real miracle. And it's still available to anyone who believes. Jesus looked at them and said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Matthew 19 verse 26.